Not too long ago, I sat down for a conversation with my wife of 11 years. Unfortunately, it ended with her in tears, stirring up memories of a similar moment 3 years earlier. Back then, I was on the verge of losing my job, and my wife, Kate, her full name is Catherine, was heartbroken at the idea of me missing our anniversary. She was so adamant that I come home to celebrate. Fast forward to today, and now it's her who won't be around for our anniversary. I didn't try to argue or change her mind, though. Despite moments like this, the last 12 years have been the happiest of my life. When I first met Kate, she was 24, just starting out in sales. She came to our architectural firm to pitch us on advertising in high-end magazines, something we couldn't afford at the time. Even in a crowded room, my eyes were drawn to this captivating woman with jet black hair. After discussing the proposal with my business partner, he gave me the nudge I needed to get her attention long enough to ask her out. On our first date, she admitted she already knew we couldn't afford her services. It didn't matter. I was already smitten. Over the next 6 months, our relationship blossomed, and eventually, she moved in with me. Kate had been living a nomadic lifestyle, so transitioning to a steady office job and stable home took some time. For months later, we exchanged vows, and I became her husband. Even now, I can hardly believe my luck in convincing her to marry me. A sense of urgency gripped me as I dialed my boss's number again. I've been with the company since the very beginning. When Craig started it, there were just 4 of us on the design team. Together, we found ways to reduce production times across various fields, which earned us remarkable success. "Craig, I know you're there. Please pick up," I pleaded into the phone. After a pause, I finally heard his familiar voice. "Dan, I'm swamped right now. What's going on?" he said, sounding rushed. Keeping it short, I told him, "I'm leaving now and won't be back until Monday." "Leaving? Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone shifting to curiosity. "I'm celebrating my anniversary with Kate," I explained. "I'll be back Monday." "Have a great trip," he replied with a grin in his voice. "And remember to knock before entering." I laughed, responding, "You always know how to make me smile," Craig quipped. "I hear that a lot, though not from people who truly know me." With a chuckle, I added, "Honestly, I could use a break. Things have been tense at home ever since they brought someone new to manage Kate's department. Maybe this getaway will help." "It can't hurt," Craig agreed. "Just promise me one thing. If you find adventure, think of me." "Deal. See you Monday," I said, ending the call. Before hanging up completely, I asked Rosa, Craig's secretary, for a favor. Rosa was resourceful and always knew how to make things happen. I needed a plane ticket, and she didn't disappoint. After wrapping up with her, I headed home to pack. While throwing items into my suitcase, the phone rang. Rosa's efficient voice came through. "You've got 45 minutes to get to the airport for security. The ticket's waiting at the counter in your name." She also added that no rooms were available at Kate's hotel, so she had booked 1-2 blocks away. "Have a safe trip, Dan. See you Monday," she said before hanging up. I quickly gathered my essentials, grabbed my shaving kit, and double-checked the room. I even remembered to turn off the coffee maker, something I rarely did, before rushing out the door. Over the years, I discovered a few shortcuts to the airport, and they came in handy that evening. Despite driving fast, I made it with time to spare. After breezing through check-in, security, and boarding, I settled into my seat. Once the plane took off, I put on my headphones and let the music carry me away. Flying makes me nervous, but music helps me stay calm. About 3 hours into the flight, I was startled awake by a gentle tap on my shoulder. I realized I'd drifted off, no surprise, considering my sleepless nights lately. Stress at work and tension at home had taken a toll. Kate and I had been in a rough patch for a couple of months. She'd grown distant, keeping me at arm's length. It started when she told me about a colleague, Mr. Paul Reynolds, who was promoted and became her department head. Determined to prove she deserved the role, Kate poured all her energy into outshining him. At first, she came home exhausted, venting about strategies to surpass him. But after a couple of weeks, her tone shifted. She mentioned they had started collaborating. The thought of their growing connection made me uneasy, but Kate always reassured me there was nothing to worry about. As the plane began its descent, I took my bag from the overhead compartment and mulled over how to surprise Kate with a dinner invitation. After landing and catching a taxi to my hotel, I chatted with the driver, who recommended a cozy, dimly lit restaurant nestled between my hotel and Kate's. It sounded perfect. After a quick check-in and shower, I headed out, eager to catch Kate before her plans for the evening. A glance at the lobby clock showed it was nearly 5:30. Outside, the streets were bustling with life. I decided to walk to my destination, following the receptionist's directions carefully. The route was straightforward, and I made a mental note of the charming restaurant the taxi driver had mentioned. It turned out to be just steps away from Kate's hotel. Before leaving the taxi earlier, I made sure to tip the driver generously, a small token of appreciation for his helpful suggestion. By 5:50, I was standing in the hotel lobby, waiting my turn in line at one of the reception desks. When a woman motioned for me to step forward, I approached with a polite smile. "Hello?" I began warmly. "My name is Dan Cardiff. Could you tell me if my wife, Catherine Cardiff, is in her room? I'd really appreciate a chance to speak with her." The receptionist, efficient and professional, confirmed. "Catherine Cardiff, you said?" After double-checking her records, she nodded. "Yes, she's a guest here. Let me check if she's in her room." She picked up the phone and dialed, her fingers moving with practiced ease. After a few moments, she looked back at me with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no answer from her room. Would you like to leave a message?" she offered. Hiding my disappointment, I replied, "Not at the moment. I was hoping to surprise her. Tomorrow is our anniversary, and I'd be grateful if you didn't mention this conversation to her." "Of course, sir," she reassured me with a kind smile. "And I hope you have a wonderful anniversary tomorrow." "Thank you," I replied, trying to sound optimistic. "I'm planning to visit a restaurant nearby. Maybe I'll get lucky and run into her." With that, I wished her a good evening and moved on. As I wandered toward the far end of the lobby, I came across a bustling hall filled with people. The space was alive with activity. Guests working, chatting, eating, and enjoying themselves. The crowd was thick, and I knew the odds of finding Kate here were slim. Still, I scanned the area, searching for any sign of her. A restroom near the back wall caught my attention, and I decided to check it out while continuing to look around. Despite my efforts, she was nowhere to be seen. Just as I was about to give up, a familiar sound stopped me in my tracks. A faint, melodic laugh that could only be hers. My eyes darted toward the source, but tall booths obstructed my view, revealing only fragments of faces here and there. Reluctant to approach too closely, I retraced my steps, carefully observing the tables as I passed. Then, at the third booth from the corridor, I saw her. Kate sat there, engaged in animated conversation with a man I didn't recognize. She looked stunning in an elegant dress I'd seen her wear before on special occasions, usually for nights filled with dancing. They appeared comfortable, too comfortable, with each other. My chest tightened as I watched her lean in slightly, and then, to my horror, their lips met in a soft, unmistakable kiss. The shock rooted me to the spot, gripping the doorframe for support. My heart pounded in my chest as a whirlwind of emotions engulfed me. Trying to compose myself, I stepped away from the doorway and moved to the center of the hall, sinking into one of the padded chairs. Time seemed to stand still as I sat there, my gaze locked on their table. Her laughter rang out again, pulling my attention as she stood up beside the man. They walked toward the exit, hand in hand, her fingers tightly wrapped around his arm. Their closeness was undeniable, and the adoring look she gave him was one I hadn't seen from her in years. My breath caught, and for a moment, I was utterly speechless. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I headed for the exit, keeping a safe distance as I followed them outside. Kate clung to the man's arm, leaning into him affectionately as they walked down the street. My feet moved automatically, trailing them as they turned a corner and entered the very restaurant the taxi driver had recommended earlier. For a moment, I hesitated, trying to regain my composure. Taking a few deep breaths, I reminded myself to stay calm. The look on her face, the way she gazed at him, it all carried a significance I couldn't yet decipher, but I was determined to find out. Summoning my resolve, I pushed open the restaurant door and slipped inside, sticking close to the wall to avoid drawing attention. As my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, I scanned the room and finally spotted them at a table meant for two in a secluded corner. Moving carefully, I found an empty table nearby and sat down. A waitress appeared almost immediately. "What can I get for you, dear?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Double scotch on the rocks," I replied curtly, my mind elsewhere. As I waited, fragments of their conversation drifted over. The man leaned in and said, "Our meeting tomorrow isn't until 10 o'clock, so we can celebrate late into the night." Kate's voice, soft but tinged with amusement, responded, "I'm glad you didn't let him manipulate you into going home. We wouldn't miss our 2-month anniversary for anything." 2 months. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She added, "I can't believe it's been 2 months already." "It could have been longer," the man replied with a knowing smile. "If only you'd taken me up on my offer at the end of my first week." She laughed, shaking her head as though recalling a fond memory. "I had to play the innocent girl," she said wryly. "Given that I'm supposedly married." My hands tightened into fists under the table. Each word felt like a fresh betrayal, unraveling everything I thought I knew about her. The waitress returned to their table, placing their drinks down with a quick smile before retreating. They raised their glasses, clinking them together in a toast that seemed to celebrate not just 2 months of whatever they had but the prospect of many more. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said confidently, and Kate's cheerful response followed, "There will be many more." At that moment, my own drink arrived. The waitress set it down in front of me, her tone pleasant as she asked, "Is that all, dear?" I handed her a $10 bill and replied, "Thank you, ma'am," before turning my focus back to the pair at the adjacent table. As they exchanged glances, their expressions reflected a shared intimacy that made me feel invisible. To them, I was just another stranger in the room. But then Kate's gaze shifted, and our eyes briefly met. For a second, the recognition was there, but her expression betrayed nothing. I seized the moment, breaking the silence with a casual remark. "You know," I said, "a guy should always carry a camera for moments like this." I let my words linger, my tone light but sharp. "That expression of yours, Kate, it's iconic. Could go on a poster, honestly." Her lips moved, but no words came out. The shock and guilt flickered across her face, and I leaned back, pretending to reflect. 2 months, I mused, feigning wonder. That's a special kind of anniversary. I still remember mine, though after 11 years, it starts to lose its charm. As they exchanged uneasy glances, I continued, addressing both of them now. "Let's celebrate those 2 months, shall we? Passion and prosperity. That's what anniversaries are about, right?" I reached into my pocket and, with a flick of my wrist, tossed my wedding ring onto the table. "A lovely couple like you deserves a gift. Consider this my offering." Before either of them could react, the man, Paul as I now knew him, started to rise, but Kate grabbed his arm, trying to calm him down. He looked ready to start something, but I wasn't in the mood for theatrics. My voice was low but firm as I added, "You're lucky, buddy, that this didn't happen in my house. Kate, let me know where I should send your belongings. And if you're smart, Paul, you'll stay far away from my home." I couldn't stop the sarcasm from spilling out as I turned toward the door. "Oh, and a little ice might help with that bruised ego, or nose, depending on how the night goes." With that, I walked out, leaving the tension behind me. As I headed back to the hotel, my steps were brisk, fueled by a mix of anger and adrenaline. It occurred to me that Kate likely didn't know my current address, and after tonight's confrontation, I doubted she'd try to follow me. At the front desk, I approached the receptionist with forced composure. "Excuse me," I said, "could you help me with airline contacts? I need to book a ticket urgently." "Certainly, sir," she replied with a professional smile. Could you provide your preferred airline, destination, and departure time? I gave her the details and thanked her before heading back to my room. Inside, the events of the evening played on a loop in my mind, each memory more bewildering than the last. How had things unraveled like this? Pacing the floor, I couldn't shake the thought that perhaps Kate had missed her true calling. Her performance tonight was nothing short of theatrical. Unable to stay confined any longer, I grabbed my bag and made my way back to the lobby. The receptionist, just finishing a phone call, gestured for me to come over. "Sir," she said, "if you leave now, you might make the last flight of the day. Registration closes in 30 minutes. If you miss it, the next flight isn't for another 3 hours." "Thank you," I replied, already calculating my odds of finding a reliable taxi. After settling my bill and signing the receipt, the receptionist smiled warmly. "I'm sorry to see your visit cut short. Please stay with us again next time," she said. The flood of memories that rushed over me as I exited the hotel was almost overwhelming, but I pushed them aside, flagging down a taxi. $50 if you can get me to the airport in under 30 minutes. I challenged the driver as I slid into the back seat. "You got it, boss," he replied with confidence. His skill behind the wheel shaved precious minutes off the journey, and we arrived at the airport in just 20 minutes. I paid the fare, added a generous $150 tip, and thanked him before hurrying toward the terminal. Once through security, I found a seat near the gate and waited for boarding to be announced. Unlike my earlier flight, I didn't need music to distract me. My mind was already racing with thoughts, and for the first time in a while, I allowed myself a moment of humor. I recalled Kate's mother, Deborah, and her constant disapproval of me. She had always treated her husband, Greg, poorly, controlling him with a sharp tongue and a cold demeanor. She hadn't liked me from the start, even accusing me once of ogling other women. An absurd claim, but one she seemed to relish. During the flight, doubts gnawed at me. I pulled out an old photo of Kate and me, studying it with fresh eyes. Suddenly, the image seemed foreign. Her expression, the way she gazed at me in that photo, now seemed hollow, as if hiding something I hadn't seen before. I sat there, questioning everything. How could I have missed this for 2 months? What else had slipped past me? Kate's supposed rejection of Paul's advances now felt like a well-crafted lie, part of her facade of innocence. My mind churned with possibilities, but one thing was clear. I needed a plan. By the time we landed, I had decided. I would pack up all her belongings and deliver them to her mother's house. Deborah would undoubtedly blame me for everything, but the truth was in plain sight. As I drove home, the details of the journey blurred. It didn't matter how long it took. I arrived, stepping into the dimly lit house with the weight of everything pressing down on me. As I stepped into the house, I was struck by a strange and unsettling sense of unfamiliarity. The realization that I'd have to adapt to this as my new normal gnawed at me. Dropping my bag by the door, I headed toward the kitchen, my movements almost robotic. On my way, I instinctively turned on the answering machine. Kate's voice came through, filled with a mix of desperation and pain. "Dan, please don't do anything rash. I'm on my way home to talk. Just, please wait until I get there." Her tone was raw, her emotions laid bare, but I wasn't in the mood to listen, not after everything. The sound of her voice brought a surge of anger I couldn't suppress. Acting on impulse, I slammed my fist against the counter. It was rash, sure, but in that moment, it felt like the only way to keep myself from making an even bigger mistake. It was clear that sleep wouldn't be an option that night. Restless and determined to act, I went to the garage and pulled out the suitcases she'd collected over the years. I picked a large black suitcase and a smaller bag for her clothes, setting them aside. The rest I carried to the bedroom. One by one, I went through her closet, grabbing what I thought she might need and stuffing it into the suitcase. I repeated the process with the dresser drawers, each pass through her belongings feeling both methodical and surreal. It had been ages since I'd even noticed some of the items tucked away in there. For a brief moment, a ridiculous thought crossed my mind. Something about grabbing hot dogs and marshmallows and turning this into a solitary gathering. But I quickly pushed it aside. I considered driving straight to her mother's house but decided against it. I didn't want to face Deborah or anyone else right then. Instead, I opted for another plan. Without waiting for her to return, I drove to the hardware store and bought new locks for the house. The act felt both petty and necessary, a way to reclaim my space. Back home, I realized I couldn't leave the pile of her things cluttering the front room. I loaded everything into my car and headed for her mom's house. The drive was quiet, almost too quiet, as I mulled over everything that had led to this moment. When I arrived, I unloaded the suitcases and boxes by the garage. I made sure not to leave them in Greg's way. He already had enough to deal with, considering his wife and daughter never seemed to lift a finger to help him. As I dropped the third box, Deborah appeared. "Hi, Dan. What's all this? What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. I straightened up and replied evenly, "Well, when Kate gets here, she'll probably need her things. I figured she might stay with you for a while, so I thought I'd bring them over." Her face grew pale. "What do you mean, when Kate gets here? She's not in town, is she? Why would her things be here?" I hesitated briefly before answering, "Deborah, I'm not sure how she plans to sort things out. Maybe she'll move in with the person she's been spending time with. I can't say for sure. That's why I brought her stuff here." Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "What are you implying?" she demanded. "Are you accusing my daughter of something? Kate would never cheat on you. She had to stay out of town for work." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Deborah, I saw them together. They were celebrating their 2-month anniversary. Or maybe 3 months, depending on which of them you believe. It wasn't just work. I flew out to surprise her for our anniversary and found them having a private dinner at a romantic restaurant. I didn't interrupt, but I saw enough." Her voice trembled, her disbelief evident. "That can't be true. She's always been so committed to you." "She was committed to him that night," I shot back. "They weren't exactly hiding it either. I even overheard her telling him how glad she was that I didn't manipulate her into coming home. She was too busy celebrating with him to care about us." I sighed, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Deborah, I'm done. You might feel obligated to stand by her because she's your daughter, but I don't owe her anything anymore. She's been lying to me for months, coming home every day like nothing's wrong, while spending her nights with him. I'm not going to pretend everything's fine just because you don't want to believe it." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for a contradiction, but I didn't give her one. "She made her choice," I said firmly. "She's free to be with him now without hiding it. Once she's done pretending, she can come here. You can see for yourself who she's become." With that, I turned and walked back to my car, leaving Deborah standing there, pale and silent. I drove off, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The distance between us now was both literal and emotional, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was regaining control of my own life. As I stood there, the weight of dishonesty pressing on my chest, I made one last instruction to Deborah before I left. "If she calls, tell her exactly what I said, no sugarcoating. Let her know I'm eager to see how she handles this situation." With those words, I got into my car and drove off, the restlessness in my mind mirrored by the aimless way I wandered around the house for hours afterward. Eventually, I found myself in the garage, setting up a makeshift workspace in a quiet corner. The rhythm of my movements offered a small sense of control until the sudden chime of the doorbell broke through my thoughts. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked to the door, opening it cautiously. Without a word, I instinctively stepped back as Kate entered. "You must have been in the garage," she remarked, closing the door behind her. "I tried knocking, but you didn't hear me." "I was just tidying up," I replied, my eyes scanning the room as though seeing it for the first time. Kate let out a weary sigh. "Well, Mom already called me. It's clear you've made up your mind about what to do with me," she said, her voice a mix of sadness and disappointment. I met her gaze, my own expression unyielding. "What did you expect, Kate? That I'd be fine with you having an affair?" I asked, the question hanging heavily between us. She hesitated before responding, her voice quiet. "I guess I wasn't thinking clearly. At least, not rationally. My frustration boiled over. It's funny, I said bitterly, because all I've done is think. You see, I didn't have anyone to distract me from my thoughts. No dinners out, no cozy nights at a club, no whispered secrets in the dark. Just me, left with the realization that the woman I shared my house, my food, my life with could so easily lie to me. Tell me, Kate, how does someone look their husband in the eye, knowing they've been with someone else? Her face fell as she quietly asked, "Are you really ready to throw away 11 years of our life together? Don't I deserve a chance to explain?" "Explain what?" I shot back. That it was all just a game to you? That you were testing how much I'd tolerate before I finally broke? Well, congratulations, you've got your freedom now. No more pretending, no more juggling anniversaries. You and, what's his name again? Doesn't matter. You can move on together without having to think about me. Kate's voice softened as she replied, "I think I understand your perspective." I shook my head, the disbelief clear in my tone. "Do you, Kate? Do you really? Because I don't think you do. For you, this was just an affair. Something you probably found a way to justify in your mind. Maybe you even blamed me for it. Am I right? Did I drive you into someone else's arms?" She lowered her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, I don't blame you for this. It just happened." I let out a hollow laugh, the sound echoing in the room. An affair doesn't just happen. It takes effort, planning, secrecy. And let me tell you, you played the role well. It's incredible, really, the way you managed to balance it all while convincing me everything was fine at home. And that tearful voicemail last night? Oscar-worthy. Maybe you should consider acting as a new career. You'd give those Hollywood stars a run for their money. I couldn't help but laugh. A brief, bitter outburst I didn't bother to suppress. Let's be honest, Kate. If this is how you treat someone you claim to love, spare me your anger. It's clear you don't love me. Not anymore. Her indignation flared. How can you say that? After 11 years, you think I don't love you? I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. Here's a question for you, Kate. Let's say I was the one who had a fling, a one-time mistake, nothing long-term. How do you think you'd react? She hesitated, then answered softly, "I'd probably ask you to leave, maybe even start divorce proceedings." I nodded. Exactly what I thought. I can even picture you throwing something at me for good measure. But now imagine this instead. For nearly 3 months, I act like everything is fine between us. I share meals with you, smile at you, and kiss you goodnight, all while my heart belongs to someone else. I spend my days with her and come home to you as if nothing's wrong. Could you still believe I love you after that? Kate sat silently, her face betraying her inner conflict. I don't know. Well, I do, I said firmly. It's obvious now that the time we spent together meant far less to you than it did to me. And as for this situation, Kate, it's clear you've already moved on in every way that matters. So don't ask me to fight for something you've already destroyed. She tried to protest, her voice trembling. The time we shared wasn't meaningless, Dan. I truly valued it. I enjoyed being with you. I cut her off, my tone sharp. Do you even remember the last time you showed it? Because I don't. Minutes later, Kate came back downstairs, hurriedly stuffing cosmetics into a floral zip-up bag. She glanced at me, forcing a smile. You were thorough, you only missed a few things. I might have to call you when it's time to move. Of course, I replied with a polite smile, though my words carried an edge. I'd be happy to help, as long as it's not anywhere near me. Rising from my seat, I moved to open the door for her. As she reached the threshold, she paused and suggested, "Why don't we go for a walk?" Her request gave me pause. After a moment of consideration, an idea struck me. Wouldn't it be better if you ran instead? I asked, maintaining a serious expression. She turned to me with a small smirk. "Kiss me on the spot," she said lightly, though the weight of the moment hung between us. I wouldn't dare kiss someone when I don't even know where she's been. I shot back, my tone cutting. Without waiting for a reply, I closed the door behind her. And that, as it turned out, was the last time we spoke. 3 months passed in silence, during which my lawyer worked diligently to finalize the divorce paperwork. By Monday, everything was ready. I was instructed to pick up the documents from the lawyer's office and bring them to Kate for her signature. I planned my day around 2 stops. First, my lawyer's office, and then Kate's mother's house. My only objective was to ensure Kate signed the papers so there would be no lingering false hopes of reconciliation. When I parked outside her mother's house, I sat for a moment, staring at the familiar facade. It felt surreal to be there for what was essentially the final act of our relationship. Soon, this chapter would be closed, and I could begin to reclaim my peace. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, walked to the front door, and rang the bell. Deborah, my mother-in-law, opened it with a look of mild surprise. "Well, Dan, what brings you here?" she asked, her tone curious. "I thought you'd forgotten about us." "Not yet," I replied simply. "Is Kate here?" "Yes, she's here." "Come on in," Deborah said, stepping aside to let me through and closing the door behind me. A few moments later, Kate appeared in the room, her expression guarded. "Kate," I began, holding up the envelope, "I'm here for you to sign these. I'll file them tomorrow and that'll finalize our divorce. I just want this to be over." Kate sighed, her voice tinged with regret. "I don't think I was ever good enough for you, was I?" she said, her words hanging in the air. I looked at her steadily. "Do you seriously think I'm just going to stand by and watch, after everything that's happened these past few months?" I replied, my voice calm but firm. Without another word, Kate left the room briefly, returning with a pen in hand. She flipped through the papers, signing her name in the appropriate places with hurried, almost defiant movements. I watched her closely, noting the tension in her posture. When she finished, she set the pen down with a sharp clink and gathered the documents into a manila envelope. "All done. You're free now," she said flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. "Thank you for signing," I replied. "Take care of yourself, Kate. I hope you find happiness." Shifting her focus to herself, she called out, "Mom, you can come in now." Before leaving, I turned back briefly. "Congratulations to you as well," I said, the sarcasm in my tone unmistakable. Then I walked out the door, leaving that part of my life behind. As I drove away, a wave of mixed emotions crashed over me. Relief, sadness, anger. They all swirled together, but above all, there was a sense of finality. This was the end of our relationship, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was on the brink of a new beginning. A month later, the divorce was finalized. I was ready to move on, but then unexpected news reached me through Kate's father. He informed me that after our divorce, Kate had asked Paul to leave his wife and marry her. Paul, however, made it clear that wasn't an option. He admitted that he had no romantic feelings for her and had never intended for their relationship to become serious. The revelation left Kate devastated. According to her father, she had no choice but to come to terms with the fact that she was now without me and without Paul. She moved back in with her parents and began searching for a new job after being unceremoniously dismissed from her previous one. Just like Paul, thanks to some strategic moves on my part. Her father confided that Kate was deeply unhappy. She had attempted to move on, but her encounters often involved married men looking for casual affairs or individuals with questionable reputations. These choices and the emotional toll they took led to her developing a psychiatric illness. Now, she's in therapy trying to piece her life back together. Hearing this news didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, it underscored just how much damage had been done, not just to me but to all of us. As I moved forward with my life, I resolved to leave the past where it belonged, behind me.